The following was produced with funding from the Vermillion River Watershed Joint Powers Organization and Minnesota Trout Unlimited. Vermillion Falls in Hastings is one of Minnesota's historic waterfalls. The Vermillion River's watershed is the largest in the Twin Cities area, draining 335 square miles, from a small part of eastern Scott County through most of Dakota County. About 49 miles of the river and its tributaries are state-designated trout streams. This is the only trophy brown trout fishery in a major metropolitan area.
For those people that live in the watershed, it's vital for them as they have a role in protecting and improving our water resources.
We really would like to see people become aware of the river and the watershed and its needs to help take care of the place where they live.
Rain and snow falling on 20 cities and townships eventually drains into the river. Here is a bird's eye view of where the river begins, near Elko New Market. Most of the watershed is agricultural, but it also includes some of the fastest growing urban areas in the state. The river has 4 major tributaries: South Creek, Middle Creek, North Creek, and then the south branch of the Vermillion River. After the falls, the Vermillion River splits. One channel runs into the Mississippi River at Hastings. The other channel reaches the Mississippi at Red Wing. Then that water flows all the way to the Gulf of Mexico.
Hey, bigger picture, what I'm doing on the land is going to affect the folks down in Louisiana. You have to know how to identify fish, correct?
On a fall day in Farmington, Minnesota Department of Natural Resources fisheries biologist TJ Debates discusses fish populations with science students from Lakeville South High School, which is in the Vermillion River watershed.
The presence or absence of fish in a stream will tell you a lot about the water quality that they live in the watershed, what's happening in the watershed. Fish just don't show up by us driving around with a stocking truck putting fish in. They need to understand that habitat is important. They need to understand that what they do on the land within that watershed is important.
The field trip is part of an environmental education program designed to connect kids with watersheds through hands-on learning.
Either in a watershed of a river or stream or a lake or a pond in our backyard, that we have to understand we need to protect that water.
This one is a little more robust.
On this part of the field trip, the students were learning about macroinvertebrates, insects and crustaceans that have no backbone and spend most or all of their lives in the river.
So as you're looking at these insects, you want to think about how they're able to get oxygen. They need oxygen too. So not only are habitats important, but also water quality is important.
They also went for a walk along the river to learn about its elements.
How can we figure out if this is an undercut bank? Why not? Lay down and look.
And I learned that the river, you have to keep it clean and like natural habitat and stuff like the vegetation, and not to call it weeds, to call it aquatic vegetation.
And they also learned how surrounding land use can affect the river itself.
It's not what's right next to the bank of a river or a stream, but what's happening a couple blocks away that's really impacting the quality of the water. In this case, we've got ball fields and buildings, so we've got pavement, runoff, we've got all sorts of potentially fertilizers or pesticides.
The Trout in the Classroom part of the Watershed Education Program
We're going to talk about our fish eggs here.
came that winter as students raised trout from eggs. Students study fish biology and water chemistry. The program is run by the nonprofit conservation group Minnesota Trout Unlimited, with the help of volunteers, local donations, and a grant from the Minnesota Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund.
Yeah, we did the ammonia every day.
Students learn firsthand how water quality affects fish and other life. Then in the spring, the students release their fish in the Vermillion River in Farmington. The agency in charge of monitoring the watershed is the Vermillion River Watershed Joint Powers Organization.
I try to take the technical stuff and turn it into something usable for not only decision makers, but also landowners.
The mission of the VRWJPO is to collaboratively provide education, science, and support to restore and protect the Vermillion River watershed's natural resources for all who live, work, and play within its boundaries. As part of that mission, the JPO gathers data through sampling at monitoring stations.
This is South Creek. At this location, we track the creek's level and the water flow within the creek. We also collect water quality samples, and this helps to tell us what sort of pollutants we have in the river, how much. We also do what we call biomonitoring, where we collect fish and macroinvertebrates and look at the habitat each year.
It's part of an extensive network of monitoring stations on the river and its tributaries.
And it helps us to really kind of narrow our efforts.
Monitoring the river has identified some stressors on fish. Turbidity is a major problem affecting some stretches of the Vermillion River. Turbidity is a measure of the water's cloudiness. The majority of turbidity in the Vermillion River is due to sediment in the water.
Too much sediment in the water can be directly harmful to the critters that live in the stream because they have to breathe the water with their gills. It can erode their gills, do physical damage to it, but it also fills their vital habitats up, where they live, where they reproduce. All that can get filled with sediment.
Sediment can come from farm fields, eroding stream banks, and urban stormwater.
Keeping that sediment on the landscape, trying to eliminate it from getting into the stream is really important.
This photo shows how an eroding channel was washing sediment into Lake Marion, which drains to the Vermillion River. Now that channel has been restored and protected through a partnership between the JPO and the city of Lakeville. This photo from the 1930s shows a stretch of the Vermillion River that lost its natural curves, also called meanders, when it was ditched in a straight line. Ditching was designed to move water faster, to drain areas, and to make farming easier.
So sometimes we humans think that we have the best answer. We do something in a way that doesn't match up with the natural way of doing things.
It reduced fish habitat and flood storage. So when the DNR bought the ditched land for public use, new meanders were constructed. This is what it looks like now, 1.5 miles of new river habitat where before there was only a mile-long ditch. This photo shows how the same kind of ditching was done on Middle Creek near County Road 64 in Farmington. Now it looks like this. Meanders are restored and the ditch is filled. It's another capital improvement project done in partnership with the VRW, JPO, DNR, and other stakeholders, and funded in part by Minnesota's Clean Water, Land, and Legacy Amendment funds. This map shows the numerous JPO-funded projects that have been completed to improve water quality. Water quality is affected by runoff from rain and snow. Parking lots and other impervious surfaces that don't let water soak into the ground can carry pollutants down storm drains and into the nearest lake or other water body. One way to prevent that is by building rain gardens that trap the runoff and let it soak into the ground. The VRW JPO provides education, advice, and cost share grants for projects like rain gardens. The rain gardens at this Lakeville Municipal Liquor Store back up a parking lot that uses porous pavers.
They wanted to design a project here that would mimic natural hydrology, and the porous pavers work in such a way that there's space between them filled with rock. We're soaking water back into the ground, which helps to keep our groundwater supply sustainable.
Right behind me there's an irrigation pivot. So people are using the water below us from the ground to water crops. You can also see some water towers out there, and those water towers are using groundwater for people to drink.
Groundwater also supplies the cold springs that make the Vermillion River cold enough to support trout and other sensitive cold water species. The DNR manages groundwater withdrawals through an appropriation permitting process to ensure that permitted withdrawals do not negatively impact local water supplies or other resources such as wetlands, rivers, and lakes. One way to protect our groundwater is to use less of it by using alternative water sources. These ball fields at King Park in Lakeville are kept watered by a sprinkler system that draws water from a nearby stormwater pond instead of using the water the city draws from groundwater wells. The VRW JPO also works closely with farmers.
They care about their land, they care about the water quality that we have around, and they want to do the right thing. In the urban areas, we have a a lot of areas that were developed many years ago, a lot of impervious surfaces, agricultural fields. We don't have the impervious surfaces, however, we can get a lot of runoff, as well as groundwater contamination from nitrogen. We don't want to be so forceful that we're telling them what to do. These people own their land. They want to make decisions on their land that make the most sense.
Vegetated buffer strips between plowed fields and waterways filter sediment and other pollutants from field runoff. Dakota County farmers successfully put in buffers and met the state's buffer law.
We're trying to get natural vegetation that would be native here back and trying to restore and build up the riverbanks.
Fortunately, residents are becoming more aware of the Vermillion River's value. Among various volunteer groups working in the watershed is Trout Unlimited's Vermillion River Keepers.
Yeah, it was a blast today. It was a good workout.
Here, they were clearing invasive non-native buckthorn brush along the south branch of the Vermillion River under the direction of the Minnesota DNR.
We've cut all the buckthorn here, and you can see that there's nothing else growing underneath it. Nothing to hold the soil in place, nothing to infiltrate the water before it rushes into the stream. The stream is seeing a fair amount of erosion into the stream corridor. And then we can manage with grasses, and you can walk out to the prairie on another, like the Coomer parcel, and you'll see insects and butterflies and just a tremendous amount of life. And it's a whole part of the ecology of this area, and it's something that's been missing.
The Vermillion River has come a long way since the 1950s, when state officials called the water quality a disgrace.
A really degraded resource, nothing could live in here.
Now, it has improved enough to sustain an impressive brown trout fishery.
I do feel optimistic about the river. We've made some dramatic improvements.
None of the significant improvements in water quality would have happened without caring and cooperation.
You know, with local governments and state governments working to put in regulations that protect and improve the river, whether it's your backyard or as a developer putting a new site in, all have some sort of impact.
That applies to the individuals, it applies to families, it applies to larger landowners who have more control over more land area. It applies to cities, it applies to the county, it applies to all of us.
All of us share the responsibility of improving, restoring, and protecting the Vermillion River as a valuable natural asset for our region and for future generations. Learn more about the watershed at vermillionriverwatershed.org. And learn more about the Watershed Education Program, Trout in the Classroom, Restoring Trout Streams, and Trout Fishing at mntu.org and at the Twin Cities chapter website, twincitiestu.org.